Good evening. It's another Wednesday night here, and welcome to HC Highlanders Live from our homes again. It's become the norm. Hopefully not. Hopefully you'll see us in our offices on campus of Houghton College in the near future. But we're glad to join you no matter where we are. Some changes this week in New York State where we are. We're in phase one of our reopening. That kind of changed some things on campus a little bit of how the community can use some of our outdoor athletics facilities, and so that's always hopeful, and it's a plus to see some people now allowed to go out on our athletics fields and tennis courts and our new disc golf course. Maybe Matt, you can talk a little bit about that. I'm Jason Muker, joined by Matt Webb today. Other news of happening last week, we had our commencement here at the college. A bunch of our student athletes who are our senior student athletes contributed a lot during their 4 years here. We're able to virtually be recognized for finishing their college careers. Also last week, we inducted the third member of our, actually both the third and the fourth members, well, actually the second and third members of our Hall of Honor induction class. Dr. Paul Mills, who we let you guys know about that last Wednesday during our show, and then Caitlin Fadden-Platt, who was a class of 2009 grad, cross country and track athlete, our first NAIA national champion, was inducted. And we still have one more, Donna Hornerbrook, coming up in the sometime this summer. We'll let you know about that. Great field hockey coach who went on to coach at Cornell for a number of years after her stint here at Houghton. So it's always a great opportunity to recognize our Hall of Honor inductees every year. And we have one joining us tonight. I'll let Matt talk a little bit about that, someone who's already on the Hall of Honor. So I'll turn it over to Matt.
Yeah, so just a few things before I introduce our guest tonight. Jason mentioned the disc golf course, and interestingly, that we put that in last fall, and due to the COVID and so forth, that's been just a real popular activity, and a lot of people have been getting out there because that's been something people can do is sort of get outside and walk in the woods, and it's a very wooded course. And we're actually exploring the possibility of maybe building an additional disc golf course. I actually just met with my counterpart here that had the brainstorm a few years ago, Brian Webb, and we walked the facility and looked at some other space, and we talked with the people that put the original one in, and there's some ideas of adding a second course, which would be a different style course than the one that we've got right now. The course we have right now is real wooded, and there's some ideas and thoughts of using our Field of Dreams facility for maybe putting in a second course. So that would just be kind of cool. It's pretty neat to be thinking about some of those things. The other thing I was thinking that's new, not necessarily new as of last week, but in a time where many institutions are making cuts and just dealing with the budgetary implications of COVID, we're actually in the process of trying to hire 3 new employees. We've got 3 openings. We're very close to hopefully announcing a new women's basketball coach with Coach Muker's resignation. We're also very close to filling one of our athletic training positions. And we're also the recipients of an NCAA grant for an ethnic diversity and women's internship position, fully funded by the NCAA. And we received that grant a few years ago, and we had someone come in and fill that position. And we're pretty close to filling that position for the next couple of years as well. So it's sort of exciting in a time where people aren't necessarily adding a bunch of jobs. We're bringing new people on staff and excited about that. So that's really a fun thing. So, and it's to get to our guest now. It's really it's a privilege for me to introduce to you Coach Skip Lord, good long friend of mine and former boss. For many years, served as the athletic director at Houghton before transitioning into a new role as the executive director, national director for athletics engagement. And I'll let him explain that a little bit more. That's an interesting title. But Coach Lord has worked at Houghton for over 30 years. And all of those years, up until just the last 2, have been directly in athletics. And Coach Lord served as a mentor for me, and in my role as the athletic director, it's sort of funny. He'll know what I say. He'll know what I mean when I say that. I've called him a few times and said, "You sure you don't want this job back?" There are challenges, and he's just been a great support in my first couple of years, sort of filling his shoes and learning what it really means to be director of athletics. But thanks for joining me, Skip. And maybe just to kick things off, to let everybody know, how long have you been at Houghton? When did you start, and what did that job look like when you started at Houghton all those years ago when you came here?
Right. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. It's always a privilege to be involved with the athletic department and with you and Jason and our Highlander alumni and friends. So thanks for having me. I came to Houghton started my contract the fall of 1987. So I was hired in the spring of '87. My contract started that fall, and this just completed my 34th year. So 32 years in athletics, last 2 years in advancement in my new role. But initially, I came in sort of a unique situation. I was the head women's basketball coach, the head volleyball coach, the equipment manager, the sports information director, and I taught some classes. And as I tell my kids, all for less than what they pay for cars these days. So sort of an interesting situation. I prior to that had spent about 7 or 8 years teaching in several different public high schools, coaching and administrating and doing some of those kind of things, but had always wanted to make the move to the college level, and the opportunity at Houghton popped up, and I threw my hat in the ring, and the rest is history, I guess.
Look at that. Dan Wood is watching from down in sunny South Carolina. Skip Lord, one of the best. Thanks for joining us, Dan.
Dan's a good friend. Does a great job with the NCCAA, and that's an important organization for Houghton and so many other Christian colleges.
Yeah, that's been a great relationship we've had in the past, and then in recent years we reestablished that relationship. So when people, today, coaches complain about not having enough time to do all that they need to do, we can just send them to you when you were coaching 2 sports and equipment manager and teaching and doing all those things. So
right. But it's certainly a different world. It's a different world, and things have evolved, and we have grown as it was a situation where each individual coach sort of managed their own thing. We set up our benches and pulled out the bleachers and put up the scores table and made sure we had people to manage things and so forth. So it was a little bit of a different situation than it is now, but it was a great way to be involved with a lot of people and serve in a broad capacity.
Yeah. So over the years, you obviously transitioned eventually to just full-time AD, and you gave up your coaching, but you kind of did that in shifts. I mean, how did things evolve over those years? You coached women's basketball for many, many years.
Yeah.
But
yeah, it was one of those things where Bob Danner was the vice president for student life at the time, and was the person that hired me to come to Houghton, and worked closely with him. But he got to a point where he decided and transitioned that I was going to succeed Coach Doug Burke as athletic director. Coach Burke, as you know, legendary soccer coach AD here at Houghton for many years, not just legendary at Houghton, but within the NCCAA and within the NAIA. He's a national NAIA Hall of Famer as well. Reached a point where they made a decision that was going to be the succession. And so I began to serve as the assistant AD while Doug was still the AD. And I spent a little bit of time, several years doing that. And then when Coach finally retired, I moved into the athletic director's position. And at that point, gave up the volleyball position and moved into a situation. It was pretty common in the NAI in those days. You don't see it much. There's a few people grandfathered in, but you don't see it much in the NCAA, especially at the Division III level anymore. But back then, for example, Coach Burke was the AD men's soccer coach for years. And so it was very natural thing for me to coach women's basketball and be the AD. And so I had given up those other pieces of the job. And it was interesting because I gave up the volleyball, and we hired a new coach, Glenn Conley. You probably remember Glenn. Glenn was, a lot of people don't realize it, but he was the first over 40 athlete to ever high jump 7 feet. And he actually beat Dwight. Dwight Stone was sort of the high jumper of that era. That was the great public high jumper. And Glenn actually accomplished that amazing feat before Dwight Stone did. So he was pretty amazing. But he was here for a year and then ended up getting the position at West Point as the head volleyball coach. And he left, and I came back and took the program for a year, and then was able to hand that program off to one of my former players, Nancy Cole, who spent 20-some years, I mean, a long time, highly successful volleyball coach. But it was sort of an honor to be able to hand that off to one of my former players and be able to do that.
Yeah, and then you kept coaching basketball, and eventually handed that off to Alicia Muker 7-8 years ago now, I think it is, and sort of finished your time in athletics just as the athletic director.
Yeah, so it was one of those situations where the NCAA, as I mentioned, it was a pretty common thing in the NAIA to have that dual situation. But when we sat down with some folks who were giving us some advice and doing a little consulting with us about our application for Division III membership, one of the strong points that they gave us was, you need to be a full-time AD. And you need to step away from the coaching, it was a challenge when I had to do that as the volleyball coach, sort of the emotion of having, those relationships, as you well know, you coached for so many years, the relationship with those student athletes, and step away from that. And then to have to do that again in the basketball realm in order to best position us to guarantee our acceptance into Division III of the NCAA.
So thinking back over your 25 years of coaching, look at that. There's D commenting also. Thanks for watching, D. What sticks out? I'm sure there's lots of memories, lots of highlights, mission trips, relationships, wins, whatever. What do you think of when you look back on those years of coaching? What do you remember most fondly?
Yeah, well, I'm a relational person. My coaching style is relational. I'm a little bit of an old school coach. I look at the coaches today, and they're like PhDs in their sport. They're the old line. They're a mile deep and an inch wide kind of thing. Well, I was sort of the old school jack of all trades. There's not very many sports that I haven't coached over the years, either at the high school or collegiate level. And so, I always saw my role as working with student athletes, and sport was my venue to do that. And it wasn't a huge deal as to what sport it was, as long as I got to work with young people, and to be able to come here and do that and Christian college context was such a blessing. But to be honest, when I left public education and came to Houghton, in my mind, it was one of those things of, I'll get this position and I'll spend 5, 6, 7 years at this level, and then I'll get a chance to move on. And obviously God had other things in mind. So when you think about all of those different student athletes that you interact with as a coach over all those 25 years as a basketball coach, 8 years as a volleyball coach, 1 semester as a head men's basketball coach, where we did both of those programs at the same time. That's one thing that stuck in my mind. I remember the San Antonio trip that year, and going down there and coaching one game, run into the locker room, sort of wrap it up, run out of that locker room into the other locker room, come, get ready and come back out and do it all again. That was a unique experience to say the least. But mission trips have been a special part of what we've done. Houghton has had a reputation as being committed to sports ministry for years and years, and long before I came. But oftentimes, prior to when I came, it was more of individual athletes doing sports ministry and leaving here with a solid foundation to go and do sports ministry other places. And if you think about the people that graduated from Houghton in the late 70s and early 80s in particular, there's a whole group of people there, that Johnny Orlip and Brian Davison and Kevin Austin, and just on and on and on. I'm leaving out, a bunch of people, but, they went off and started Sports Life, and they branched out of that to MAI and sports ambassadors and other things. And, there was lots of that individual kind of thing going on. But one of the twists or change of directions that we tried to make was we tried to create a program where every student athlete would have an opportunity within their 4-year window to have an international sports ministry experience. And we didn't get to the point where we were 100% with that, but we certainly had a chance to expose a lot of students to that. We did just women's basketball and the NAI, you could do this. NCAA, you can't do it quite the same, but we went 15 consecutive years to Czech Republic, and the last 3 or 4 of those, Czech Republic and Germany. We took 3 high school teams, a boys team, a girls team, another boys team, of kids that came out of our sports camps that we took to Russia and did some things with. And I think back on those, I think 2 of the most memorable, impactful ministry experiences, relational experiences that I've ever had in my entire life would come down to 2 of those trips. One was a father-son trip that we did, where we took a group of high school varsity level boys from our summer basketball camp and their dads. So you got this group of high school boys that are probably 16, 17 years old average, and their dads, almost exclusively, 98% of the people who went on a trip as adults were dads of the guys that were playing. And the dad's average age was 50, and we're going to Russia, to Moscow. And you think about this, because these dads are people that grew up during all of the Cold War stuff.
Right.
People who would go, when we were in school, in elementary school, we'd go hiding under our desk or in the hallway with our heads against the lockers, kind of thing, with air raid drills and all this kind of thing. So it was really sort of a powerful thing to walk in. I remember we played a game, kids played a game, we played a game, and then we're out to eat afterwards. And you're sort of looking at a table over here, and it's got all of our high school boys and all these Russian boys, and they're across the table, and there's yap, 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 back and forth, talking to each other a mile a minute. And then I looked around our table, and there's all these men who are, again, average age 50. So you got people on the top end that are in their late 60s at that point, down to maybe the youngest people were, in their mid 40s. And you got these Russian guys from their team and these Americans. They're just all sitting here like this, sort of staring across the table at each other. And you can tell they're both thinking, you're why I had to do all that. And it was interesting to watch how that evolved. But the relationships between the fathers and sons and the impact that had on them, and the impact in terms of supporting our missionaries there, was powerful. And then the other one that was so powerful was we did, with our Czech Republic and Germany ministry, we pulled together a group of women's basketball alumni, and we took our collegiate team, and they went on this trip together. And it was just a blessing to me to sort of be able to push these folks out there and watch these women who had grown through participated in the program and gone off and started their own careers and families, and see them interacting with the current student athletes on our teams. Again, impactful, life-changing in so many ways for our current student athletes that participated, the alumni who went on those trips, and me and my coaching staff as well. So those were 2 of the big deal experiences as far as mission work were concerned. Lots of experiences in the coaching realm as well.
You speak about all those trips, and one that you didn't mention that I was part of was the what do we call it, the Blitz trip, where we took
the Burnos
men's and women's basketball
Yeah.
men's and women's soccer, I think volleyball, and then we had a baseball group from Indiana Wesleyan joined us. This was before we had baseball.
Yeah.
But I think back to that trip. Well, one, it was memorable for me because one of our student athletes lost her passport as we were getting ready to get on the plane to go home. And I ended up staying with her, navigating our way through Prague. This is before we had cell phones. And I felt like I was on The Amazing Race. That was an adventure.
And but you think go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say that was back during that time when I was serving in a volunteer capacity with the Wesleyan denomination as director of sports ministry. And that we had teams from 4 out of the 5 Wesleyan schools. So we had team from Indiana Wesleyan baseball. We had team from Southern Wesleyan women's basketball. We had teams from Houghton. We even know at the time Kingswood was still called Bethany, but we had a group who came from Bethany and included some volleyball people, but also were just sort of service and support personnel for us. So we had 86 different student athletes. And at that point in time, that was the largest group that Global Partners had ever sent out in one group. And they came from all across the country from 4 of the 5 different schools. So that was a pretty cool experience.
Well, that was a neat experience, and obviously there was a lot of ministry that happened in relationships with folks in the Czech Republic. But I remember what I just enjoyed seeing so much was the relationship and the connectedness between our own teams, which it happens, it happens on campus. But the nature of teams a little bit is to be pretty singularly focused, and all I care about is my team. But seeing all those teams sort of come together, and I know to this day, our former men's basketball coach, Corky McMullen, he would talk about that trip being so significant for his relationship with Ernie Walton, who was a member of the men's soccer team at the time. And that's where they really got close and got connected. And those sort of things just happen on those trips, and they're really impactful and long lasting. So,
well, as our good friend Judy Fox would say, it's all about relationships.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So, well, thinking about your coaching, and this next question sort of is connected to that, but from an administrative perspective, in terms of leading the department and seeing the department through, various transitions and evolving over the years, when you look back in terms of all that's happened with Houghton Athletics during your time as the AD, what things there sort of stand out to you, are the most memorable? I say, what are you most proud of? But I don't, not from a personal pride perspective. What do you, what do you look back on with just a lot of satisfaction? Boy, that was a lot of fun. That was a neat process. That was, what do you look back on from that perspective?
Yeah, I would throw a number of different pieces in there. I obviously, from a process perspective, being able to, all of our years and all of the great relationships and the things that we were able to accomplish as a department, as individual teams within the NAIA, we still to this day have good friends, and dear colleagues from our time in the NAIA that we'd be remiss to leave them out of the mix. But the transition to Division III NCAA, was, even though that was tough emotionally because of those relationships, it was the timing was right. Just the evolution of sport and what had happened in the Northeast. It was the right timing. And when you think about the mission, when you think about Houghton College, whenever I would be out recruiting, and even to this day, when I talk about Houghton, I talk about academically rigorous and intentionally Christian. And you talk about that student athlete concept. Division III makes sense. Western New York, it has the little 4 there, the 4 Division I schools. But at that time, the only other option was multitudes. There are probably 4 or 5 different NCAA Division III conferences. So this sort of Division III hotbed. I remember we used to. We'd go out recruiting, and we'd spend time explaining who Houghton was and where Houghton was and what the NAIA was. And at that point, if people were still interested, then we'd be able to do something. And now when we go out and we say, who Houghton is. They know who Houghton is because we're members of the NCAA, because we're members of the Empire 8, because they come and use our facilities. And that's a great segue into, another one of the special things, obviously being able to be so involved with the rest of our great team here at Houghton and conceiving or sort of conceptualizing and developing and being part of the leadership that got the Kurpagula athletic complex here. That was pretty significant, pretty huge thing. And so you look back and sort of Division III, but then the facilities to be a legitimate Division III program. At the same time, knowing that if we're going to go Division III, we're going to have these kind of facilities, going to make this kind of move. It's really important for us to simultaneously get back into the NCCAA and be able to be affiliated with such a great group of folks and such a common mission as that group had. So that was important. But I would say bigger, I used to tell my players, after you've been with a team for a certain number of years and you'll bring in a particular team and you have goals with that team that you're trying to achieve in that particular season. But I always try to remind them that this team is just the current manifestation of a program that precedes you and is going to post-date you, and that you basically are, as the Bible says, you're building on the foundation that other people have left or built, and others are going to come and build on whatever foundation that you leave for them. And so, for me, it's one of those neat things to be able to, you were courteous enough, kind enough to allow me to sit in on a few interviews for that NCAA.
Look at that, Judy Fox commenting. Judy, who are you talking about, Coach or me? Am I your hero or Coach Boyd? We'll have a talk afterwards.
There you go. But I guess to be sitting in on those interviews and to be sort of looking at the screen and it's sort of one of the blessings of this COVID time. People complain about the screens, but I'm sitting there looking at the screen and I'm seeing Jason and I'm seeing you and I'm seeing Dee and I'm seeing Brian and I'm seeing Katie and so forth. Andrew the other day, and I'm thinking in my mind, those are people, that I was able to hire and was privileged to serve with. And now that I'm moving on to other roles and other responsibilities, have been able to hand off to those folks. And so just in the same way that teams build on what teams before them have done, I was blessed to build on what so many great folks, George Wells and Doug Burke and Dick Alderman and many others, the Mabel Nielsen and others, the foundation that those people laid, I was able to build for a little while on that. And now to sort of look and see, people that I was privileged to serve with in my sort of former life, if you will, carrying on and doing and do things differently. But it's sort of like when Alicia, I was privileged to pass off women's basketball to Alicia, and it made it a whole lot easier to be able to give that to somebody who played for me. And I've told people more than once, I've said, she knows more about basketball. She's forgotten more about basketball than I ever knew. And she'll do a lot of things her own way. But one thing I know is that the core values of what we stand for will change. And it's a little bit of the same thing, and think about those special things. Yeah, the projects and the trips and all those things are cool, but the relationships are what it's all about.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. We need to wrap up, but I'd be interested in hearing, and I think the folks that are listening would be interested in hearing. Tell us about your new role. You've been in this role for
2 years.
2 years now.
Yeah.
National Director of Athletics Engagement.
Yeah.
What does that mean? What are you doing now? And what are you enjoying most about this new role?
Yeah, well, I think boils down to, I've said this to multiple people. I mean, president figures if you're someplace for 32 years, about time you use those relationships to try to, garner some resources for the program, kind of thing. So, in one sense, it's a little bit of that. I try to go out and maintain relationships that I already have, reestablish relationships that maybe we haven't done as good a job with, that we need to do a better job with, establish new relationships and do things that allow us to build resources or bring in resources to support our current program. The Highlander Club is a new thing that we started within the last few years, aimed at doing that. That's a way for people to be involved and support either an individual team or an unrestricted area that you have some control over where it goes. But like any place else, we're a small campus and people have multiple responsibilities. So in addition to working with people who are athletics alumni and friends of athletics, I also have some regional areas that I work with and am privileged to work with and talk about things that go well beyond athletics. When you're someplace 34 years, you know a little bit more about what's going on than just your little niche of the world. So do some of that as well. But privileged to serve on a wonderful team led by Carl Siston, who's our vice president, and John Oden, who's our director of operations, and so many others. Just it's interesting because it's a team of people that are working together, achieve goals, and just did a great job with the one-day giving challenge, beat the annual, the total number of donors, and also the total amount of money. We had a new record in those areas, and we're pushing on toward the end of the month to try to hit the $70 million goal for our impact for Greater Houghton. So it's just another team and another way to serve, and I'm thankful that God still has a place for me to serve and hasn't put me on the old bench yet. So thankful for that.
Well, I know I've explained to people, it's interesting. It's not quite the same, but the Division I athletic model, most large Division I programs have full-time, fully dedicated advancement, fundraisers for their athletic departments.
Yeah.
Multiple people, in large departments. And in some ways, it's a little bit of a Division I model. I mean, you're not out there funding the athletic program.
Right.
But as you and I talk about projects that we have, and as we continue to sort of cast vision and ideas, and we'd like to do this or that, those are the kinds of things I know that you use when you're talking to potential donors that help the program. And so, like you said, there's been quite a few gifts, and there's funding available for some special projects, and it's really a neat thing. And I'll just say from my perspective, I've enjoyed continuing to work with you, and we meet regularly, not daily by any means, but regularly to talk about ways we can be engaging with alumni and donors and projects that we're working on. And I think you being involved in the interview process that we're doing for our intern is just really valuable. And your availability on the phone when I have no idea what to do in a situation is really, really helpful and welcome. So thanks for continuing the paving of the way that was started by those before you, and then continuing to build on that, and leaving me in a place that's a really, really strong foundation. And I enjoy the work that I do that was started by you and those that came before you. So thanks so much, Skip. Appreciate you. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. We'll see you all next week. Guest to be announced.